Welcome back to another video. It's fantastic to have you here. My name is Bones and this will be the first episode of a 2D platformer tutorial series. Let's get started. In this series I will show you how to make Super Mario Bros. Like 2D platformer. This tutorial is oriented towards novice and apprentice developers. You will learn how to make movement, attacks, various enemies and traps, secret objects and platforms, secret levels, and many more things that are found in a Super Mario Bros. Game from 1985. In this first episode, I'm going to start off from a few premises. 1. You have already installed Unity on your computer. You can find many tutorials on YouTube for this step if you have not yet. 2. You know the basics of C#, such as what are variables and basic data types. Example: string, int, float, etc. I will try to insert definitions in small text boxes throughout the video to remind you of these things as we go. First of all, open Unity and press New to create a new Unity project. Give it a name and select 2D project. I already created mine, so I won't create another. Now that we have created a brand new project, it's time to create the folders. Create 3 folders named Sprites, Scripts, and Prefabs. Right-click on the project panel, go to Create and Folder, then name them accordingly. Then you want to create your art. You can either make it yourself or find art on the Unity Asset Store. I will draw my own, but I will keep it simple for the sake of saving time. After you created your art, it's time to import it into Unity. Go into the Sprites folder, open it, right-click inside it, hit Import New Asset and locate your art. Click on it and hit Import. Congratulations, you have now imported your art into Unity. But if you just use it as it is, chances are it's going to be blurry. Select all your sprites and look at the inspector. First you will set the pixels per unit. Less pixels means larger sprite. More pixels means smaller sprite. I chose 8 pixels per unit. Make sure all your sprites have the same amount of pixels per unit, otherwise they will look odd when next to each other. Next thing is to look at filter mode. Click on it and select point. Now go to compression, click it and select none. Perfect. Now all of your sprites should be ready to use. Drag and drop the platform sprite into the scene. Now open the prefabs folder and drag the 2D sprite game object from the hierarchy into the prefabs folder. With this you have created a prefab. Prefabs allow for the reusability of game objects as they store components, values and child game objects. Changing a prefab will override all of its instances. Open your platform prefab, select the object and look at the inspector. Click on Add Component, search for Box Collider 2D and hit Enter. Now click on Edit Shape and set the Box Collider 2D size to be the same size as your platform. I will begin placing down the platform object to create a basic level. Now that we have a basic level, it's time to work on the player. Drag and drop the player sprite into the scene and this time create a prefab of the player. Open the player prefab, click Add Component and add a Box Collider 2D. Click on Edit Shape and make the Box Collider of a proper size. Now add a rigid body 2D component to the player. If you hit play, you will now see that the player falls and collides with the platform. Now to make the player move, go into your scripts folder, right click, create, C# script and name it player movement. You can name it whatever you want, but it's best to keep scripts properly named so you always know what they do. Open the player prefab and click on the player in the hierarchy. Now drag the player movement script onto the player's inspector. Now the script is added onto the player. Let's open it. First of all, we will need a bunch of variables. Float move input. This variable is what we will use to figure out whether the player should go left or right. Public rigid body 2D RB. Public float speed, which will determine how fast the player moves. Public transform pause. Public float radius. Public layer mask ground layers, which will allow us to select what objects our player can jump on. Public float jump force, which will be the determining factor for the player's jump height. Bool grounded. This boolean variable will be true or false depending on whether the player is on the ground or not. Public float height cutter. Next thing to do is write the awake function. In the awake function, we will define our RB variable. Since RB is a variable of type rigidBody2D, that is the only thing it can hold. Thus, we will equal it to the player's rigidBody2D. Write RB equals GameObject.getComponent, specify rigidBody2D, and end it with two brackets and a semicolon. We will now create a new function named fixedUpdate. FixedUpdate should always be used for physics, as it can be called more than once per frame, while update should always be used for checking inputs, as it is called once per frame. FixedUpdate is called before the update function. Write rb.velocity equals new vector2 open bracket move input times speed, comma rb.velocity.y and close the bracket and semicolon at the end as well. With this, we're leaving the movement on the y-axis unchanged. Now it's time to define our move input variable. Go into the update function and write move input equals input.getAxis horizontal. Now while you hold down A, move input will be equal to -1, and while you hold down D, move input will be equal to 1. When you're not pressing either of those two keys, move input will be equal to 0 and you will not move. Awesome! You can now move your player left and right. Let's move on to jumping. We'll first check in the update function whether or not the player is grounded. We'll say grounded equals physics2d.overlapCircle open brackets pos.position radius and ground layers. With this, the grounded boolean variable will be true if the circle we're creating is touching objects which are on the layer specified by our layer mask. Next up, we'll write an if statement checking whether or not grounded is equal to true and the player pressed space. If both conditions are met, then the player will jump. We'll say if grounded and input.getKeyDown keycode.space rb.velocity equals vector2.up times jump force. If you leave your jump code like this, then every time you press space, your player will jump the same height. If you want to jump a small height if you held down the spacebar for a small amount of time, then we'll have to add another small bit of code. We'll first check if the player let go of the space key. Then we'll check if the velocity of the player on the y-axis is greater than 0. This way we're not affecting the player when it falls. We'll say if input.getKeyUp keycode.space and rb.velocity.y is greater than 0, then rb.velocity equals new vector2 rb.velocity.x rb.velocity.y times height cutter. With this, the y-axis velocity will be abruptly reduced and the player will no longer move upwards, reducing the jump height. Now it's time to set all of the public variables. In the player prefab, click on the object to see the player's inspector. Now click and drag the player from the hierarchy into the RB slot. This will create a direct reference from the rigid body 2D component of the player. Set the speed and jump force of the player to something that feels good to control. Also, in the rigid body 2D component, set the gravity scale. Now click on the plus in the hierarchy of the player prefab and click Create Empty Child. Now move this empty game object at the position of the player's feet. Click on the player in the hierarchy and drag this object into the pose slot. Now go to layers, click add new layer and name this new layer ground. Now go to the platform prefab and give it the ground layer. Now you have a character controller that allows you to move and jump. That is all I have for today. If you have any questions, ask them in my Discord server or in the comment sections. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment. Helps out me, helps out the channel, and most importantly, it shows me that this is a series you wish to see continue. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.